When did you realize your parents saw you as property rather than a person? I discovered it when I turned 21. My father locked me in our basement for refusing to marry his 48-year-old business partner. That day stays etched in my memory. I'd just wrapped up my third year at university and came home for summer break. My father had been acting strangely, raving about some amazing opportunity to elevate our family. I assumed it was a business deal. Turns out I was the deal. Raphael showed up for dinner that night. I'd met him before at my father's company events. He always gave me creepy vibes, the way he'd stare when he thought no one was looking. I never understood why my father insisted I attend those gatherings until that night. Midway through dinner, my father started gushing about Raphael's admiration for me, how he'd be a great provider, and how lucky I was that such a successful man was interested. I felt sick. Raphael just sat there grinning like this was normal. Then my father pulled out a box. He said Raphael had asked for my hand, and he'd given his blessing. At first I thought it was a sick joke. I looked at my mother, who stared blankly at her plate. My brother Hayden wouldn't meet my eyes. I laughed and told them all to off. That's when my father's face twisted. I'd seen him angry before, but never like this. He told me I had no choice, that Raphael was offering $2 million to merge our families through marriage. I stood up, said I wasn't for sale, tried to leave, but Raphael grabbed my arm, claimed my father had promised me to him. I panicked, grabbed a wine glass, and smashed it against his face. Everything after that blurred. My father lost control, screaming I'd ruined everything, that I was an ungrateful who didn't grasp his sacrifices. Raphael bled, muttering about taming me, and my mother just cried in the corner. I tried to run, but my father caught me, dragging me to our basement. It was finished, with a bathroom, no windows. We used it as a rec room before he converted it to store collectibles. He threw me inside, saying I'd be free when I apologized and accepted my responsibility to the family. I heard the lock click, screamed until my throat was raw. No one came. For hours, I banged on the door, begging to be let out. My phone was upstairs. I had no way to call for help. I kept thinking, this can't be real. They can't just keep me here. But nobody came. I heard them moving above, Raphael's voice the next morning, like nothing was wrong. My mother slipped food under the door that evening. I begged her to let me out. She whispered I needed to cooperate. My father had invested everything. Our family would be ruined if I didn't agree. When I asked how she could let this happen, she said sometimes women sacrifice for the family. Then she left. By the second day, I was panicking. I kept hearing Raphael and my father finalizing details like I'd already agreed. I realized they wouldn't let me out until I gave in. That night, my father slid marriage contracts under the door, said I'd sign them tomorrow no matter what. He called me generous, considering my behavior. That's when he said it. You're worth $2 million to this family, and you will not ruin this deal. I sat in that dark basement, realizing I'd never been a daughter. Just an asset, something to trade. Hayden finally let me out after 48 hours. He looked terrified, said he couldn't stand hearing me cry, told me our father and Raphael had gone to the bank to set up merger accounts. He urged me to run, promising a head start. But when I got upstairs, I saw the signed marriage contract on the dining table. My father had forged my signature. That's when something broke. I knew screaming and fighting wouldn't work. They'd just lock me up again, maybe somewhere worse. So when they came back, I pretended to be defeated. I apologized to Raphael, said I'd been overwhelmed, that I understood now. The relief on my father's face was grotesque. Raphael looked smug, like he'd won. My mother hugged me, whispered, "Thank you," like I'd done her a favor. Only Hayden looked sick about it all. The wedding was set for 3 months later. Those months were the longest of my life. Every morning I woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe, trapped in a house where people saw me as something to sell. Raphael came over almost daily, bringing jewelry, necklaces that felt like collars, bracelets too tight. He watched me with those eyes while I faked gratitude. My skin crawled every time he touched me. He talked about our future, home, a mansion where I'd be comfortable like a pet in a nice cage. My father treated it like a business transaction, talking about me in the third person. She's good with numbers. She knows how to entertain guests, selling my features like I was a product. One night I overheard Raphael telling my father he shouldn't worry. I'll tame her after the wedding. My mother played both sides. She'd slip into my room at night, say she understood, then show me wedding magazines, talk about how lucky I was. When I asked how she could do this, she said marriage was about building a future, not silly things like love. That's when I realized she'd been traded too. Maybe not as extreme, but traded nonetheless. Hayden was the only one who saw how up it all was. He'd shoot me looks during dinners when Raphael talked about training me to run his household. We whispered plans late at night. He was 19, scared of our father, but he wanted to help. I knew I had to escape before the wedding, but it wasn't simple. My father froze my bank accounts, took my passport and ID for safekeeping. Raphael hired a wedding planner who reported back on everything I did. I wasn't allowed anywhere alone. I started small. I told Raphael I wanted to prove I could be a good wife. Asked to help with his business paperwork. He ate it up, thought I was accepting my role. I used it to get his contact info, learned his routines, figured out when he'd be unreachable. I pretended to get excited about the wedding. deliberately brought up details to make my father leave the room. That gave me chances to search his office. I found out my father's company was failing, had been for years. Raphael's merger wasn't just profit, it was survival. The $2 million was his lifeline. The worst part was wedding dress shopping, standing there in white gowns while my mother and planner cried about how beautiful I looked. All I could think was I'm being dressed for my own funeral. Raphael insisted on seeing photos, texting opinions, lower neckline. I want to see more skin. My mother just nodded and ordered alterations. Every night I locked my bedroom door, pushed furniture against it, and cried silently. Wedding invitations went out. Old friends congratulated me on marrying a wealthy man. Nobody questioned the age gap. Nobody asked if I was okay, they just saw the money. Hayden helped me get my ID back. He created a fight with my father as a distraction while I broke into his safe. I didn't get my passport, but I had my driver's license. I started collecting cash, small amounts from my mother's purse, selling Raphael's jewelry to pawn shops 2 towns over during dress fittings. Things worsened when Raphael decided to prepare me for married life. Private dinners where he quizzed me on his preferences, told me exactly how he wanted his house run, what he expected from a wife. He said I wouldn't return to university. Educated women make poor mothers. He expected children within the first year. He sat too close, touched my thigh under the table, ignored me, flinching away. One night, he tried to kiss me. I pushed him against the wall when I turned my face away. He told me I needed to get used to it, that we'd be doing much more after the wedding. I had to freeze instead of fight back. Couldn't risk him telling my father I was resistant. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found out they'd already decided where I'd live, what I'd wear, even what I'd eat. I overheard Raphael telling my father he didn't want me getting fat after the wedding. He'd have the housekeeper monitor my meals. They disgusted me like I was a show dog that needed to maintain its appearance. That's when Hayden snapped. We were in his room, me telling him what I'd overheard, and he just stood up. Fuck this. We're getting you out. He said he had savings for college, enough to get me away, hide somewhere Raphael and my father couldn't find me. We made a plan. Hayden would create a big distraction the day before the wedding. I'd take a bus to the city, then another across state lines. A university friend would let me stay without asking questions. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. What we didn't count on was my mother finding the bus ticket. She was cleaning my room, something she never did, and found it tucked inside a book. I came back from another horrible lunch with Raphael to find her sitting on my bed, ticket in hand, face white. I thought she'd run to my father. Instead, she just looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, "Do you hate him that much?" Not my father, Raphael. Like that was the only reason I wouldn't want to marry a man old enough to be my father who saw me as property. I couldn't lie anymore. I told her yes. I hated him. Hated the way he looked at me, touched me, talked about me. Hated that my father had sold me. Hated that she had let it happen. I started crying, all the fear and disgust and rage pouring out. I told her I couldn't breathe when he was near me, couldn't sleep knowing what was coming. For one moment, she hugged me. She stroked my hair like when I was little, whispered that she was sorry, then said, "But you'll learn to live with it." That broke something in me. I realized she wasn't going to help. In her mind, this was just how the world worked. Women were traded, used, controlled. They adapted by giving in. She didn't tell my father about the ticket, but she started watching me constantly. Wouldn't leave me alone with Hayden. Told the wedding planner to check my bags whenever we went out. My one potential escape route was gone. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Raphael came over with more contracts, business agreements between him and my father. I stood outside the study listening to them discuss terms. Raphael would transfer the first $1 million upon signing the marriage certificate. The second would come after I proved myself for 6 months. They had written criteria: obedience, availability, appearance, fertility. I went back to my room and threw up. I sat on the bathroom floor shaking, realizing I was out of time, out of options. In less than 48 hours, I'd be legally bound to this man, taken to his house where no one would hear me scream, trapped completely. That night, I made a new plan. If I couldn't escape, I'd make Raphael back out, make him decide I wasn't worth the investment. The rehearsal dinner was at an expensive restaurant Raphael rented out. All his business associates and my father's company people were there. I sat next to Raphael at the main table, his hand constantly on my knee under the tablecloth, squeezing whenever I shifted away. I waited until everyone was there, all eyes on us. Raphael stood to make a toast, talking about how excited he was to welcome me, how grateful my father was to entrust me to him. That's when I stood up, looked around at all those faces, and said in the clearest voice I'd ever managed, "I need everyone to know that I'm being forced into this marriage. That my father locked me in our basement for 2 days when I refused Raphael's proposal. That he forged my signature on the marriage contract. That Raphael is paying him $2 million to marry me against my will." The room went completely silent. Raphael's face twisted into something terrifying. My father half rose from his chair, face purple with rage, but I kept going. I told them how Raphael talked about training me, the criteria for being a good wife, how they'd taken my documents, controlled my movements, planned every aspect of my future without my consent. I finished by looking directly at Raphael's business partners and saying, "Is this really the kind of man you want to be associated with? Someone who has to buy a wife, who locks up women who say no to him?" My father was across the room in seconds, grabbing my arm so hard it bruised instantly, hissing that I needed to shut my mouth. Raphael tried to laugh it off, telling everyone I was emotional about the wedding, had cold feet, but I could see the shock, the discomfort on people's faces. Some women looked physically ill. One of Raphael's older colleagues stared at him with undisguised disgust. My father practically threw me into the car. The entire ride home he didn't speak, just that terrible silence that terrified me more than his yelling ever had. My mother was crying. Hayden looked both proud and scared out of his mind. When we got home, my father grabbed me by the hair, dragged me toward the basement door, screaming that I'd ruined everything, that I'd destroyed our family, that I was nothing but an ungrateful, who'd rather destroy her family than do her duty. Hayden tried to stop him. He actually tackled him to the ground. They fought while I scrambled away, ran to my room, locked the door. I could hear them still fighting, furniture breaking, my mother screaming for them to stop. I sat with my back against the door, heart pounding so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my plan had worked or if I'd made everything infinitely worse. All I knew was that I couldn't take back what I'd done. My phone started blowing up. Texts from Raphael, each one more threatening than the last, calling me a lying batch, saying I'd regret humiliating him, that no one made a fool of him and got away with it, that he'd make sure I had nothing and no one when he was done. Then my father started pounding on my door. I could hear the wood splintering as he threw his weight against it, screaming that he'd kill me himself, before letting me ruin everything. I spent that night barricaded in my room, listening to my father rage through the house. He stopped trying to break down my door after Hayden called the police, but I could hear him downstairs smashing things, screaming about ungrateful children and family loyalty. My phone kept buzzing with threats mixed with bizarre attempts to salvage the situation. One minute he was saying he'd destroy me, the next offering to forgive me if I apologized publicly. The police came, talked to everyone. My father somehow pulled himself together, told them it was just a family disagreement about wedding stress. They didn't even ask to speak to me separately, just accepted his explanation and left. Classic useless cops. I saw a nice house in a good neighborhood, and assumed nothing truly bad could happen here. Hayden slept on the floor outside my door that night. He said he wasn't going to let anyone get to me. I could hear my mother crying, in her bedroom, my father's voice rising and falling as he alternated between threatening her and pleading with her to fix this mess. Morning came, and the house was eerily quiet. I was afraid to come out, but eventually hunger and the need for a bathroom forced me to unlock the door. I found Hayden still there, bleary-eyed but determined. He walked with me downstairs, keeping himself between me and any potential threat. The house looked like a hurricane had hit it. Broken glass everywhere, pictures knocked off walls, furniture overturned, but no sign of my parents. Hayden said they'd left early, heard the car pull out around 5 a.m. Neither of us knew where they'd gone, but I had a sickening feeling it involved Raphael. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I needed to know what was happening. I called my mother, no answer. My father went straight to voicemail. Finally, I texted a cousin who was supposed to be in the wedding party. She responded immediately. "The wedding is still on. Our parents are telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown, but you'll be better in time for the ceremony." They were lying to everyone, spinning a story where I was mentally unstable rather than being sold like property. I felt like I was going to pass out. Hayden made me sit down, brought me water, kept saying we'd figure this out, but I could see the fear in his eyes too. We were just kids, really. Me at 21, him at 19. What could we possibly do against the full force of our father's determination? That's when Raphael called. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to know what he was planning. He told me he'd spoken with my father. They'd come to an understanding about my outburst. He said he was still willing to go through with the wedding because he understood that women sometimes get emotional. Then his voice changed, got harder. He said if I didn't show up tomorrow properly apologetic and ready to be a good wife, he would make sure my father lost everything. He'd make sure Hayden lost his college fund, his future. He said he had enough influence to destroy our entire family. I spent the next hours in a panic trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't run, nowhere to go, no money. And now Raphael would be watching for that. I couldn't stay. My father would literally drag me to that altar if he had to. I felt completely trapped. Hayden and I were still trying to come up with a plan when our parents came home. My father looked different. No longer raging, but something colder, more calculated. My mother wouldn't look at me at all. They sat us down in what was left of the living room, and my father explained the new arrangement. The wedding would proceed as planned. Raphael had generously agreed to overlook my emotional outburst on the condition that I make a public statement, claiming I'd been under stress and hadn't meant what I said. I would apologize to his business associates. I would be a model wife. In exchange, Raphael would still pay the $2 million, and our family business would be saved. If I refused, Raphael would withdraw his offer and use his connections to ensure my father's business failed completely. He'd make sure no bank ever loaned to us again. He'd ruin Hayden's chances at any decent job in the future. My father delivered this like he was reading a business proposal, not describing the sale of his daughter's life. I looked at my mother, begging her with my eyes to help me. She just stared at the floor and whispered that sometimes sacrifices had to be made for family, that I needed to be strong, that I would adjust eventually. That's when I truly understood. There was no escape, no help coming. No one who would stand up for me except Hayden, who was as trapped as I was. I felt something crack inside me, not breaking but hardening. I realized that if I was going to survive this, I needed to stop hoping for rescue and start thinking differently. I told my father I needed time to think. He looked suspicious, but said I had until morning to come to my senses. He warned me not to try running again. Raphael had hired people to watch the house to make sure his investment was secure. Back in my room, I sat on my bed staring at the wall for hours, thinking about the life ahead of me. Being owned by Raphael, bearing his children, slowly dying inside while everyone pretended it was normal. I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. But I couldn't see a way out that didn't destroy everyone else I cared about too. Hayden came in around midnight, sat beside me. We didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he asked if I remembered when we were kids and would make escape plans for zombie apocalypses or alien invasions. How we always promised we'd stick together no matter what. He started crying, then said he couldn't watch this happen to me, that he'd rather give up his future than see me sacrificed. That's when the idea came. I told Hayden we needed to find leverage, something that would make Raphael back off without destroying our family in the process. If this was a business deal to them, we needed to make it a bad investment. We spent the night digging through everything we could find. My father's business files, old emails, financial records Hayden could access through the family computer, looking for anything we could use. We found plenty of evidence of my father's financial troubles, but nothing that would help against Raphael. Morning came too quickly. I could hear my parents moving around downstairs, my mother calling up that it was time to start getting ready. The wedding planner would be arriving soon to help me dress, do my hair, make sure I looked perfect for my sale. That's when Hayden found it. An old email thread buried in my father's archive. Conversations between him and Raphael going back 3 years. Planning this. Planning my marriage since I was 18. Raphael talking about how he'd had his eye on me since I was 16. Attending my father's company picnic. My father responding with suggestions on how to maximize the arrangement. Never once discussing what I might want. Just calculating the best time to cash in on their investment. I felt physically sick reading it. Raphael had been watching me, waiting since I was a minor. He'd been planning with my father while I was still legally a child. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my email, to Hayden's email, to a new account I created just for backup. I went downstairs, then found my parents and told them I needed to speak to Raphael before the ceremony. Needed to apologize properly in private. My father looked relieved. He thought I'd given in. He called Raphael immediately to arrange it. Raphael arrived looking smug, like he'd won. My father left us alone in the study, the final courtesy before delivering me to my new owner. As soon as the door closed, Raphael's facade dropped. He told me he was going to make me pay for every second of embarrassment I'd caused him. That once we were married, I'd learn exactly what happened to disobedient wives. I just looked at him calmly and showed him the emails. I watched his face change as he realized what I had. I told him if he didn't walk away from this wedding and our family completely, these would go to every business associate he had, to the press, to anyone who might be interested in knowing he'd been planning to acquire a teenage girl through her father. It might not be technically illegal since nothing happened while I was underage, but it would destroy his reputation. No one would do business with him again. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back, told him it was already backed up in multiple places, that Hayden had copies too, with instructions on what to do if anything happened to me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He demanded I call off the wedding, return any contracts my father had signed, walk away completely. He tried to argue, to threaten, but I just kept my finger hovering over the send button on an email address to his entire contact list. Finally, he broke. He agreed to everything. I watched him leave. Still couldn't believe it had worked. My father came in moments later, face ashen. Raphael had told him everything was off. No merger, no money, no wedding. He lost it. He started screaming at me, saying I'd destroyed our family, asking what I'd done, what I'd said to make Raphael back out. I just looked at him. This man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework, then tried to sell me like livestock, and felt nothing but pity. I told him I knew about the emails. I knew he'd been planning this for years. I saw the shock on his face, then the calculation as he tried to figure out how to spin this, how to justify it. I cut him off before he could start. I told him he had a choice to make. He could let me go back to university to my own life, where I could send those emails to everyone, or I could destroy his reputation the way he'd nearly destroyed my life. My mother was crying in the doorway, hiding behind her. My father looked at them, then back at me. He asked why I was doing this to him, like I was the one hurting him, like he was the victim here. That's when my mother finally found her voice. She told him enough was enough, that she'd stood by while he gambled away our future, made bad business decisions, tried to solve his problems by selling their daughter, but she wouldn't watch him blame me for his failures. The next few hours were a blur. Calls canceling the wedding, guests being told there was a family emergency, Raphael's things being removed from our house. My father locked himself in his study, wouldn't speak to any of us. My mother moved silently through the house, looking both relieved and terrified about what would happen next. That night, I packed my things. I couldn't stay there anymore. Hayden helped me load my car, made me promise to call when I reached my friend's place, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. My mother stood in the driveway watching, tears streaming down her face, said she was sorry, that she should have protected me, that she'd been weak. I couldn't forgive her yet, but told her maybe someday. My father never came out to say goodbye. I could see him watching from his study window as I drove away. I don't know if he was angry, ashamed, or just calculating his next move. I didn't care anymore. It's been 6 months since then. I'm back at university finishing my degree. My father's company eventually failed. Turned out Raphael made sure of that, his final act of revenge. My parents had to sell the house, move to something smaller. My mother calls sometimes, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. My father never does. Hayden moved in with me. He transferred to a college nearby. He says he couldn't stay in that house after everything that happened. I still have the screenshots, just in case Raphael ever decides to try again. But mostly, I try to focus on building a life that belongs only to me.